It's September 15th, 2014 in Koh Tao, Thailand. The sun has just risen. The weather is pleasant. It's humid, but there's a fresh ocean breeze cooling everyone down. People are flocking to the shore of the Sairee Beach. They're putting down their beach towels, sunbathing, and having a great time under the blue sky and listening to the gently crashing waves nearby. Some are even nursing pina coladas while admiring the view. There are people everywhere. Locals, tourists, and even journalists. The scene looks like a vacation from your dreams, right? But there's also another group of people at the same place. And from the looks of it, they don't look like they're dressed for vacation. They're not in swimming trunks or bathing suits. They're wearing police uniforms. They're investigating a crime smack dab in the middle of the beach where people are gathered. The very place where people are sipping on beverages and sunbathing is the place where 2 bodies have been found. And now, the whole crime scene is contaminated. Welcome to True Crime Stories. If you're new here, I post new true crime documentaries every single week. So if you're interested in simple, classic true crime without a bunch of new wave hoopla, then you've come to the right place. And while you're here, consider hitting that subscribe button. It's completely free and just keeps you up to date with all of my future videos. Hannah Witheridge was a 23-year-old young woman from Hemsby, England, who was really fond of backpacking and adventuring. She wanted to work for children in the field of education, so it was only fitting that she enrolled in the University of East Anglia, where she graduated with a degree in education. But she wasn't done. Hannah then got into the University of Essex, where she started her postgraduate studies in speech and language therapy. Not only did Hannah have dreams of becoming an educator for younger children, but she specifically wanted to focus on those that had disabilities and disadvantages. But before she could really take the plunge into the field of education, Hannah opted for a peaceful getaway. On August 25th of 2014, Hannah packed her bags and booked a flight to Thailand, specifically Koh Tao, which is a very attractive spot for tourists from all over the world. Hannah was not new to backpacking. She loved the concept, and she wanted to explore Thailand while on a much-needed break from her studies. So she went to Koh Tao with 3 of her friends, and they planned to have a great time there. On September 14th of 2014, Hannah and her friends made plans to go to a bar called AC Bar, where they would drink, eat, and have a fun night out. Now, this bar was a hot spot for tourists. It was a Saturday, and the bar was brimming with people. It was there where Hannah crossed paths with yet another foreigner, and his name was David Miller. David Miller was from Jersey, which was an offshore island territory located between England and France. He was 24 at the time, and family and friends defined David as a colorful character. David worked as an intern for a mining company, and he'd been stationed in Australia for a while. He was actually returning home when he made a stop in Thailand with some friends for a little vacation. Koh Tao, also known as Turtle Island, is located in the Gulf of Thailand, being the smallest of the 3 islands there. Koh Tao is about 8 square miles in area, and the population as of 2024 is around 8,000. Now, even though Koh Tao is beautiful and serene, it's also home to many Burmese people too, which sounds great, but the thing is, they lived in Koh Tao illegally. They weren't allowed to be there, but they bribed the Thai detectives with a couple hundred baht a month to let them stay there, because there were more opportunities for them in Koh Tao than compared to Myanmar. Burmese workers lived there with friends and acquaintances, and identifying them was harder than you may think. They easily blended in with the rest of the locals, but despite the high levels of immigration crime, Koh Tao was still extremely safe, and there hadn't been any violent crimes on the island in the last 8 years. And that may not sound like much, but that is an incredible feat, especially for a tourist destination like this. But just because nothing happened 8 years ago doesn't mean that it won't ever happen again. And tragically, the holiday that was supposed to be a relaxing getaway for both Hannah and David turned out to be the complete opposite. Now, we know that David and Hannah didn't know each other until they arrived at Koh Tao. Some sources claim that they met at their hotel, while others claim that they met at a local bar. But whatever the case, our story begins at the AC Bar, after David and Hannah had already met and hit it off. Now, this bar was full of travelers and tourists, and everyone seemed to be having a great time. The evening carried on between Hannah and David until after midnight, when CCTV footage showed the two leaving the bar together without their friends at around 1 a.m. This is the last footage of the two tourists because a couple hours later, David and Hannah's partially disrobed and badly beaten bodies would be discovered on Sairee Beach between 4 and 5 a.m. Now, this may sound like a sudden jump in the story, but to locals, this was exactly how things played out. It was as if everything was perfectly fine, and then it wasn't. The discovery of the crime scene was actually made by a mute beach cleaner who just happened to be walking by when he spotted the bodies. One body was in the water, while the other lay on the shore. There was a pile of clothes nearby, and it didn't take long for people to realize that the clothes belonged to Hannah and David. The bodies were found 30 meters away from their hotel, Ocean View Bungalows, where both Hannah, David, and their friends were staying, and the bodies themselves were about 20 meters apart. Locals rushed to pull the bodies out of the water, scared that the rising tide would wash them away beyond reach, and within minutes, the Thai police were called. It was a gruesome scene at an otherwise beautiful beach. The detectives arrived really late, at around 11 a.m., and began their preliminary investigation. By this point, about 5 or 6 hours had already passed, but their first order of business was to scope out the crime scene and find anything out of the ordinary. The police ended up finding a couple of burnt cigarette butts and a used contraceptive near the woman's body. But what they also managed to find were possible murder weapons. And yes, I said that plural, there was more than one murder weapon. First, a hoe was found near the bodies, and it clearly looked like it had been used to strike the victims, because it was covered in red marks and smears. Nearer to the bodies, a wooden club was also found in the same state, and the investigators took these things for DNA testing. The next thing to do was identify the victims, and it didn't take long for the detectives to come up with names. The body in the water was identified as 24-year-old David Miller, and the body on the shore was 23-year-old Hannah Witheridge. Two foreign tourists had met the night before and formed a casual friendship, but were now gone. They were found lifeless, humiliated, and discarded at the beach, which is just awful. But when the autopsy results came out, they were even more devastating. Both Hannah and David were struck in the head multiple times with a heavy object. They had serious wounds on their faces and heads, but even though David's body had not been swept away by the water, it was found that David did have water in his lungs, and a lot of it, which could only mean one thing, that he lost his life via drowning. On the other hand, Hannah's autopsy results confirmed that she'd been violently taken advantage of, which is just heartbreaking. DNA was taken from both of the victims' bodies and sent for testing, but the investigators didn't test the clothes for DNA. While the police were investigating this gruesome and harrowing crime scene, the locals did a good job of blocking the pier so that the perpetrators couldn't make a run for it on boat. But you would think that so much DNA evidence, and with such a small population to work with, that Thai investigators would solve this case and bring justice to the victims. But that wouldn't be the case, because the Thai detectives completely botched this investigation. But whether they did it intentionally or unintentionally, well, that's for you to decide, because there is a lot more to come. Even though Koh Tao was an island with a relatively low crime rate, the local police station only had 6 stationed officers for emergency response missions. Now, this number may seem pretty small, and it is, but if violent crimes don't really happen here, well, you don't really need too many officers just draining tax dollars for no reason. But here's where the real problems start to crop up. When the investigators arrived at the crime scene, they didn't even tape the area off. A crime scene where 2 people had just lost their lives was open to the public, tourists, and even journalists. People were walking all over the place and messing things up where potential evidence could have been found. Locals were even snapping pictures of the bodies in the crime scene and posting them online, which is unbelievably disrespectful. To think that the detectives didn't even make an effort to cover the bodies is just sad. The pictures were also discovered by none other than David and Hannah's families, and that was how they found out that their loved ones were attacked so mercilessly and fatally while on vacation. As the investigators were looking into persons of interest and suspects, they were mainly focused on tourists and foreign travelers or illegal immigrants. The police spokesperson claimed that Thais couldn't commit such a gruesome crime, and these detectives were laser focused on any and every non-local. They questioned everyone, and they suspected anyone except the locals. Hannah and David's friends were also questioned. Other foreigners were questioned, and this debacle even led to a manhunt for a British foreigner who was David's roommate. Now, I don't know why or how, but the investigators were convinced that David's roommate was responsible for the crime. The detectives called it a crime of passion because they thought that the roommate was interested in David, but when he saw David with Hannah, he lost control of his anger and took his life. Well, as quickly as this theory was conjured up, it came crashing down because there was literally no evidence whatsoever to support this claim, and the British tourist was finally free to go. The police, in the meantime, also conducted mass DNA testing, in which swabs were taken from almost 200 island locals. What was interesting was that most of the people the investigators focused on, though, were illegal immigrants. Now, they were still considered locals because they'd been here for so long, but they were in fact living here illegally after all this time. But regardless, after the photos of the crime scene at Koh Tao got leaked onto social media, people all over the world were terrified, and this was a really bad thing for the touristy island. The officials wanted the case to be solved quickly so that the news would quiet down and it could save the island's reputation. After all, if word gets out that Turtle Island is now being called Death Island, well, that wouldn't be good for the tourism business. So the police were racing to get this case closed as quickly as possible. And for some context, Thailand's main source of income comes from tourism. So this incident was a blow to the island's reputation and image in the eyes of the international community. Who would want to visit an island where murderers were still on the loose and killing tourists? Probably no one. This was why the Thai police chief was on the Prime Minister's speed dial in the weeks following the tragic event. The Prime Minister of Thailand at that time would call the police chief almost daily for updates on the investigation, and whether or not the killer or killers had been reprimanded yet. The Prime Minister was breathing down the neck of the police officers, and they had to solve this case quickly. Well, the investigators did the most obvious thing that they could have done, and they checked CCTV footage of the bar and the neighboring areas. Now, you would think that on an island like Koh Tao, where no crime had taken place in the last 8 years, there would be tons of security cameras everywhere. And there were, but most were not working. And the ones that were working, well, let's just say the detectives didn't bother to check every single one of them. But they did check a specific camera near the bar. The footage showed 3 men riding a motorcycle to 7-Eleven on the same night that Hannah and David were fatally attacked, where they bought cigarettes and beer and then headed for Sairee Beach. These 3 men were identified as Mau Mau, Wai Phyo, and Zaw Lin, and they were all illegal Burmese immigrants. The investigators finally had a lead, so they first questioned Mau Mau, and he said that he had driven the 2 guys before leaving them and taking his motorcycle somewhere else, and this was all before the murders. Mau Mau then said that when he came back home, he found the 2 guys asleep. The next day, the police questioned Zaw Lin, and strangely, the investigators were more interested in how he got to Koh Tao illegally than the murder of David and Hannah. But he did have a permit to work on the island of Koh Tao. But despite this, Zaw Lin was still an illegal Burmese immigrant, and because of this, he was arrested and the motorcycle was seized too. The second man, Wai Phyo, was nowhere on the island. The detectives thought that he had fled by boat, so the police tracked him down, and finally, on October 2nd of 2014, Wai Phyo was also arrested. The main suspects in David and Hannah's murder were Wai Phyo and Zaw Lin. Mau Mau was not suspicious to the police since he left the 2 guys before the murders took place. So in the police's minds, no one knew what Wai Phyo and Zaw Lin were up to when they were left alone. Now, the 2 suspects could not speak Thai, so the police, instead of calling official interpreters, relied on Burmese food vendors to understand what these guys were saying. This was basically how they communicated. The investigators would ask questions in Thai, and the Burmese food vendor, who knew Thai, would relay the information in Burmese to the suspects, and then they would answer back. Well, let me just say this was not the most reliable method to question murder suspects, but the detectives got what they wanted. They had a confession. Wai Phyo and Zaw Lin had attacked and subsequently murdered David and Hannah. This confession was enough for the investigators to arrest the 2 men. Finally, there was a break in the case. 2 arrests had been made, and the Thai government couldn't have been happier at how the police handled everything. According to the police, Zaw and Wai saw David and Hannah getting cozy with each other at the beach, and this was when they launched an attack on the two unsuspecting tourists. The investigators even claimed that the DNA found on Hannah's body, cigarette butts, and murder weapons matched the suspects. To add to it, David's missing cell phone was also found in Zaw's home. The detectives even forced the suspects to reenact the entire scene in front of the media. Now, you would think that these men were responsible for Hannah and David's murders since there was a solid DNA match according to the police, but when a lawyer from Myanmar visited the suspects in jail, he took one look at the men, and his rage for the investigators consumed his entire body. The men were beaten black and blue. Zaw and Y retracted their statements and confessed that the murder confession had been forced out of them. They'd been subjected to terrible abuse by none other than the Thai police, who not only beat them every day, but left them in a freezing room without clothes. They even went as far as threatening to use other inhumane torture methods on them if they didn't confess to the crime. Burmese residents also came forward, and they looked just as miserable. The police were terrible towards these illegal immigrants, and they treated them like actual garbage. Many Burmese residents also showed signs of abuse following the mass DNA testing. And this should really put into perspective how the police felt about illegal immigrants, hence why they were so focused on them being the murderers from the get-go, even though they had no reason to suspect that the crime had been committed by someone who wasn't a legal resident. It gets you wondering, are the people in jail right now really murderers? Or is it just the Thai investigators pinning the crime on Burmese immigrants to hide who really drove Hannah and David to their untimely ends? There was a lot of speculation and anger coming from the world. First of all, everyone thought that the Thai detectives were using Zaw and Y as scapegoats for David and Hannah's murder. The whole instance when the suspects were forced to reenact the murder in front of the media was met by severe backlash from people all over the world because it was just weird. The police chief blatantly denied abusing Y Phyo and Zaw Lin during the investigation, even though there was irrefutable evidence that proved this was a lie. Thailand's National Human Rights Commission wanted to look further into these allegations, but the police didn't show up at the scheduled meetings, even when they were called 4 times. With all of this happening, the preparations for the trial were now underway. Zaw and Y's defense team was from Bangkok, and they wanted more time to go through the evidence and the 900-page police report, but this was denied by the court. So you can tell that the defense literally had no time to prepare for how they were going to represent their clients, who people were very quickly realizing weren't the ones who actually killed David and Hannah. To add to the oddness, the 900-page report wasn't even given to the defense until the trial had already begun. In December of 2014, 3 months after David and Hannah's tragic passing, Zaw Lin and Y Phyo were each indicted on 5 charges: premeditated murder, killing to conceal a criminal offense, a sexual assault, illegal entry into Thailand, and staying in the country without permission. Y was also charged with stealing David's phone, although it was found in Zaw Lin's home, assuming that that detail is even true. The police could have just planted it there for all we know. It's all just so confusing. The trial began on July 18th of 2015, and it lasted for 18 days. The judge prohibited the public from taking any notes. The prosecution presented DNA evidence, the fact that the suspects were illegal immigrants, and how the murders were carried out. The prosecution believed that both Zaw and Y attacked David first and took his life by drowning him, before turning to Hannah and using the same murder weapons on her and even forcing themselves on her. But the prosecution failed to produce any eyewitnesses to the crime. The defense, on the other hand, claimed that the suspects were framed and they actually weren't the murderers. The defense argued that the investigators botched the investigation from the start, allowed the crime scene to be tampered with, and even made huge blunders in the DNA collection. The defense argued that the detectives were taking advantage of the fact that Zaw and Y were vulnerable illegal immigrants, and that they were basically scapegoated for a crime they didn't even commit. The defense stated that Y and Zaw went for a swim in the water, and when they came out, they realized their clothes were missing. This caused the pair to walk to Mau Mau's house, and that's when they were captured on CCTV. As for the phone, the defense argued that Y found an abandoned phone at the beach and just decided to keep it, and that's why it was found in possession of the 2 men. As for Y supposedly making a run for it on a boat, well, the day that he was arrested, as police had originally claimed, he was actually going to a different island for a new job that he had accepted. The defense also didn't have any witnesses during their statements. The main reason being that people were afraid of coming forward because they feared that they would get punished and tortured by the Thai investigators if they opened their mouths. But finally, on July 10th, the court ordered the DNA to be retested. And this was when it was found out that the DNA on the murder weapons didn't match Y or ZA. It's just mind-boggling to think that the police could frame two innocent people for murder just because they're illegal immigrants. An Australian forensic scientist, Jane Topin, volunteered to testify at the trial with her own independent findings. Her claims were based on the fact that the investigators rushed the whole DNA testing process because gathering and identifying mixed DNA was hard and time-consuming. But the detectives had results in their hands somehow within 12 hours. This would have been virtually impossible. But ultimately, she was not allowed to appear at the trial because it was thought that foreign experts and their testimony could lead to a biased decision, and therefore undermine the Thai justice system. A different way to look at this would be, look, we know you're right, we know we're wrong, but we're going to do whatever we want anyway. But in the end, on December 24th, 2015, both Wai Phyo and Zaw Lin were found guilty of murdering Hannah Witheridge and David Miller, and they were sentenced to death, even though recent DNA testing said otherwise. The defense tried to appeal the case twice, once in 2017 and then in 2019, but both times the conviction was upheld. It was only on August 15th of 2020 that Zaw and Wai's death sentences were changed to life imprisonment. And why, you might ask? Well, it was the Thai king's birthday, and the change of the decision was a way for the king to show mercy and leniency to Zaw and Wai, if you could even call it that. This whole case is just insane to think about. This investigation was criticized all over the world. The fact that Zaw and Wai didn't have legal counsel before they confessed to the crime, the language barrier, and the very messy DNA testing situation leads a lot of people to believe that the Thai investigators framed two innocent people in David and Hannah's murder, while the real murderer or murderers are walking free. Truth be told, the people that believe this probably aren't wrong. All the evidence suggests that investigators knew good and well that these men were not the killers, but they prosecuted them anyway. It's been 10 years since Zaw and Wai were sentenced for murder. A lot of residents on the island speculate that the investigators are covering for the local mafia, which controls everything on the island. Also, even after David and Hannah's tragic murders, the island continued to experience mysterious and unsolved deaths from many foreign travelers. So it really begs the question, is the Thai law enforcement department really protecting the wrongdoers? It is a haunting question and an even scarier thing to think about. When I first suggested covering this case, I thought this was just going to be discussing the murders of Hannah and David, the two main victims in this case. But after digging deeper, I personally believe there are 4 victims in this case, and the criminal behind all of this has never been caught. Unfortunately, situations like this are not isolated incidents. When money gets involved, people are willing to do the most vile things you could imagine. I've mentioned this before, but my entire family used to live in a tourist town. It was basically just common knowledge that the police were covering up crimes simply for the sake of tourism. The year that we finally decided to leave town was the year that my wife and I had seen 3 separate bodies firsthand, and the police covered up all 3 crimes. There wasn't one single news article, not one blog post, not one plea for information. It was as if all the crimes never even happened, but we saw them. Now, my wife worked with a local cop at the time, and when she asked for answers, she was told, "I can't talk about that." That was the end of the story. We saw 3 bodies firsthand. How many more did we not see? How many murders got away simply for the sake of the tourism industry? We moved away about 2 months later. David and Hannah's funerals were held on October 3rd and 10th of 2014, respectively, and their families were crushed, not just by the loss of their loved ones, but by how the investigation was handled. The Thai detectives did close the case, but no one is sure whether the people behind bars even committed any crime at all. To add to the sadness, Hannah's older sister Laura passed away at the age of 30 in 2019. She was pregnant and succumbed to complications during surgery. Hannah's mom lost 2 daughters in the most tragic of ways. Thank you guys for tuning in to another episode of True Crime Stories. I wanted to give a special thank you to a few channel members, including Jade Henson, Priscilla61, Candace Ashley, and Carolyn Rook. If you also want to become a member of the channel, you'll gain access to new videos days or weeks before they're uploaded to the public, and it is a great way to support the channel and help out. And I appreciate each and every one of you guys that have decided to do that. So if you also want to join, you can click that big join button below the video, or find the link down in the description. And don't forget, True Crime Stories shirts are now available also. You can grab those from a link down in the description too. But as always, if you enjoyed this video, check out this other interesting case I covered, and don't forget to subscribe. It's totally free and just keeps you up to date with all my future videos. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.